Welcome to your Huron Valley Chamber Today, a new show highlighting the good things happening at local businesses and organizations. This show will highlight both new members and longtime members of the Chamber of Commerce. Your host is Milford resident Gordon Muir. Gordon is a businessman, Chamber Executive Board member, and steadfast supporter of the Huron Valley community. And now, your host, Gordon.
Welcome to your Huron Valley Chamber of Commerce. We have a very special chamber program today for you. We're going to discuss the drug problem in the Huron Valley area. And on our panel today, we have three special guests. We have Randy Root from the Milford Community Coalition. And we have Andrew Larson, who is with Ford Medical Center in Milford, and Tom Lindberg, who is our Chief of Police in Milford. Welcome all to the panel. And now I'd like to ask Randy to talk us about your program.
Thank you, Gordon. The Huron Valley Community Coalition is a community-based group of folks who represent 12 sectors of our community, and we're all concerned with drug and alcohol use by teens in Huron Valley schools. We do that through a variety of strategies, including providing information like brochures and presentations like we did the other night at the Highland Library called Drugs 101, where parents can come in about an hour and a half. They find out everything they need to know about the trends in youth substance abuse. It also gives them some pointers on how to talk to their kids, which is a very important part of the prevention efforts that we put forward. We also work with the schools to talk with them about getting curriculum-based information out for the kids so they find out the facts about drugs and alcohol. And we also work with local municipalities on things such as the recent vaping ordinances that have been adopted by all the townships and the village of Milford recently, which bans the possession or sales to minors on vaping products.
Very good, very good. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that at all, or Tom?
Yeah, so I'm a primary care physician, and one of the challenges that we've seen just both at a local level, state level, and a national level is just kind of the impact that a certain class of medications, opioids, have had on our public health and our communities. That because I provide services to the entire population, that a lot of times, with these medications, it's an opportunity to kind of educate my patient panel on kind of ways to utilize these medications, the signs to watch out for with respect to, signs of abuse, dependency, that kind of thing, and that, also treat those patients who unfortunately have become dependent on a lot of these different medications. And so what's really great to be here today is to kind of work with both the law enforcement as well as community-based organizations to really provide resource education efforts and provide treatment both individually and a community-based level to really effectively deal with the problem, because unfortunately it's not uncommon to hear about the adverse impact specifically with overdose
Right.
on our both young people, our and our adult communities, geriatric populations even as well.
Right.
So yeah, it's a pressing issue, and that certainly there are a lot of great resources out there for just being aware what to look out for, with respect to those the medications that we're here to talk about. Yeah.
What about your standpoint, Tom, down there?
Well, it's important that people in your audience realize that it is a problem, and it is an issue that is in Milford, and it's in White Lake, and it's in Highland. Just in Milford alone last year, we had 4 opioid overdose deaths.
Wow.
in our community. And a lot of people that live in Milford might want to not believe that happens, and to say, well, yeah, there's marijuana or there's vaping, but there is the opioid problem that affects our community, your audience that is listening to this.
Right.
And oftentimes well, how are we going to fix it? We've heard, 2 presidents now, we're going to fix the opioid epidemic. Well, you're not going to fix it overnight. It's a problem that started over 4 decades ago. oxycodone or Oxycontin, and Dr. Larson would know more than me, but my understanding was developed to treat patients that were in the final stage or late stage cancer or other basically terminal illnesses.
Right.
And a certain pharmacy on the East Coast did probably one of the best marketing campaigns of any product, the United States had ever seen, and convinced this to get overused and oxycodone get overused. Then how it evolves is, it was being prescribed, and 4 very large Mexican cartels realized there's a market out there, and they're good businessmen.
Right.
And they were having the drugs similarly produced like oxycodone shipped into the United States. And they started making millions. And next thing you know, the CDC tells us in 2016 there was enough oxycodone prescribed actually in the United States that would have been enough to medicate every single man, woman, and child in the United States for an entire year, 24 hours a day.
Wow, my
And
goodness.
so my point, and it took a while to get there, is that something that has grown that large over so much time is not going to be able to go away quickly. And I think, in my humble opinion, there's a lot of different ways that it needs to be attacked. And one is, legislatively, Michigan has now become a mandatory reporting state when an opioid is prescribed. The doctor has to, report that, and that helps.
Right.
Holding the pharmaceutical company responsible for what they did, that helps. Trying to get a handle on what's coming in through the 4 cartels out of Mexico, that helps. But by far the greatest thing, and I applaud Randy Root for, and everybody that's jumped on board, is you have to have education on the front end. And you just have to do it, whether it's, as Dr. Larson said, whether it's a younger person or an older person, they have to understand what that medication's purpose is, what it's used for, and also recognize the people around you that, have it or have gotten it, properly, and that they're using it properly.
Right.
And that it's not okay when somebody in your household has a surgery and they're prescribed 5 days of a painkiller, but because they're really tough, they use 2 days. Well, those 3 other pills might get taken by somebody else in the household, and this is really cool when they show up at school.
Right.
Randy's steps for the coalition steps at the education really can go a long way, because what ends up happening in many, many cases is the people that use those when they're not used properly become addicted, as Dr. Larson talked, but then they move into other things when they can't get the prescriptions anymore, which would be other opioids that are illegal, heroin, and et cetera, it goes down the line.
Right.
And that will potentially continue. That's what's killing people. So even the Mexican cartel or even the U.S. people that are the drug dealers, well, we got this shipment of heroin in, and we got to find a way to make more money if we just sell the heroin like this. Why don't we take fentanyl or cat fentanyl that they got a shipment in illegally somewhere else and put it in this heroin? And that's how people die almost instantly.
Wow.
When that mixture is wrong or it happens. And even it's so volatile, at least the cat fentanyl, it's a horse tranquilizer.
Yeah.
It's a horse tranquilizer. And there's been cases, including right here in Michigan, where a police officer has responded to an overdose, had contact with an individual that was overdosing on heroin and cat fentanyl. That police officers are seeking to get treatment and actually getting Narcan because they're just having contact with the individuals that have taken that volatile, deadly drug. And I guess I started this all that it is here in Milford. We're seeing it here in Milford. There's lots of reasons this happened, and there's lots of ways it can be combated. But the biggest success rates are going to be with programs like the Coalition and doctors educating their patients on what's right and what's wrong. And this can be a useful tool in your toolbox,
Right.
but you need to use it right. And
Well, I do know that my wife was teaching a class at the high schools, and they were dealing with young children, mostly with suicide cases and stuff like that. But she mentioned to me that she thought the biggest problem with all of this starts in the home, that there isn't enough discussion with the young teenagers or even those that are very young.
Yeah, I think both of you brought up a really important point that dealing with any kind of substance use issues requires a multifaceted effort. So a big part of that does start at home, of course. That's why I was mentioning a little earlier that we teach parents some ways to open up the conversation and encourage them to talk to their kids at all times. So when they get around these kind of difficult conversations about drugs and alcohol and other serious life decisions, that it doesn't freak the kid out. They're used to mom and dad talking to them, right?
Right.
And so to do that, we've provided that information through Drugs 101 and other venues. There is also, I should mention, an app for people's mobile devices called Talk Sooner, and it's particularly for parents to get tips on how to open these conversations with their kids. It's very good. I've worked with it quite a bit, and I think it's very helpful. But as a community, we also need to open up the conversation. We need to have people, as Tom's pointing out, be aware that even in small towns,
Right.
like Milford, there are serious drug problems. And being in the work I'm in as a preventionist, you know, I like to get out in front of these issues because you don't have to recover from a problem that never happened, right? So if we can catch the kids when they're young and teach them that there are other alternative ways to have fun in their teen years rather than doing drugs and alcohol, when they're particularly vulnerable to addiction, their developing brains are really susceptible to things like, well, nicotine is one. That's why we're so concerned about vaping, because kids who vape are 6 times more likely to pick up traditional cigarettes, which goes against what most people think. It has been sold as a way to help people quit smoking. And whether it does that for people who already smoke or not, there's not a lot of good, solid research to back that up. But we know for sure that it's actually does the opposite for kids. And that, along with the fact that any kids who start smoking or drinking or doing other drugs in their teen years are much more vulnerable to addiction further down the road, is why we're so concerned with helping them find better ways to spend their time. So, and it becomes very complicated when kids are under a great deal of stress to pass these tests that schools are requiring now. They want to get into the best colleges.
Right.
They may have problems at home. Mom and dad may have their own substance abuse problems that they're dealing with. They may have, and even in our community where we have many very affluent people, we also have a lot of people who are at a very low end of the spectrum financially, and so they're dealing with hunger and transportation problems to get them to the libraries and other safe places for them to spend their time away from school.
Right.
So I appreciate that Tom brought up the complicated nature of dealing with substance use by our teens particularly. There is good news though, I must say. I try to find joy in our work, right? We're trying to save kids' lives. That's the so we should be happy in that. And I get the opportunity to work with a lot of kids in Huron Valley schools. The school district is incredibly supportive of these kids, and there's a lot of really wonderful kids. So that's great. But on the opioid front, recent research shows that our district is at about 3.8% of our kids report having misused opioids in the last 30 days, which is right around the national average. But that's also down. The good news is from 2014, that's down from almost twice that, about 6.6%, I believe. Wow. So I think these multiple efforts we've had through the medical community, law enforcement, prevention efforts by organizations like ours are really having some impact there. And in fact, nationwide, where coalitions like ours are up and running and have a lot of community support, there's a significant reduction in all kinds of youth substance misuse.
Gordon, excuse me, but I was wondering if I could ask Dr. Larson to follow up on a partial point that Randy had made.
Sure.
And my understanding is that our society has decided 18 years old is a good age for people to be able to make decisions, or 16 or 21. But isn't there truth that the brain is still developing in a human being well into the 20s or something along that lines?
I mean, neurological development, certainly. Basically, your prefrontal cortex specifically is developing in adolescence, throughout their late teens, early 20s. That region of the brain is typically associated with appreciating consequences associated with specific actions. So, throughout the entire, first 25 years of an individual's life, that process is very dynamic and certainly very present. One of the things that is sometimes helpful working with people and working with these medications from a clinical level is just to try to understand kind of and define certain terms. Basically, we refer to the opioid epidemic, and a lot of people are very familiar with that term, but that there are certain medications that kind of fall under that class, and then other medications that don't necessarily. That one of the more common medications that was alluded to was certainly oxycodone, and that in just kind of taking a step back, an opiate is any medication that is derived from, traditionally was derived from opium. And so what that means is that there are a lot of different medications that kind of fall under that category that when consumed has the same physiological impact. So we're talking about oxycodone, we're talking about morphine, we're talking about fentanyl, which was previously described. And that because these medications are very ubiquitous, in our country, it's very important just to be aware of kind of the medications that were prescribed, the medications that in a clinical setting and kind of what class they certainly fall under. So what I would say is that when we're talking about opiate overdose, it's just kind of being aware of those medications that are certainly out there, and if anybody is unsure of a medication that was prescribed to them, certainly asking their physician or clinician is an important first step. So.
Let me ask one other question. If you're a parent and maybe a child is just getting involved with one of these drugs, is there ways that the parent can understand or see what's happening, detect it, or however you might look at it?
So Randy could probably speak a lot.
That's definitely in our wheelhouse.
To this, I mean, certainly a step is always open for them to call their physician to kind of ask for guidance in that capacity.
Right.
That there are certainly other tools that Randy, I'm sure, could speak to with respect to that conversation and getting that conversation started.
Well, and that's where it starts. As we said before, Gordon, the parents need to talk to their kids, know your kids, know what they're doing, know their friends' families. Know what's in their own medicine cabinets. One of the big things that we talk to people about, and some of this surprised me, by the way, when I first heard about it, get the medications out of your bathrooms, because people go to the bathroom and it's not very polite to question people about what they're doing or how long they spend in the bathroom, right? So that's just a very easy, simple thing. Just moving it out of there helps. We've even we did a campaign where we got with realtors and asked and gave them a letter that they could share with their clients, that when they're having an open house, take the drugs out of there. They tell them to hide watches and jewelry and other valuables, but this is another thing. So there's that piece of it that just makes it more difficult for kids just by simply storing safely your opioid medicines. That goes for alcohol and now marijuana. Now that's legal too.
Right.
As long as you've got that stuff around the house and your kids it's available to them and they have access, you're putting them at risk. So some of the other things, of course, that parents might look for is typical in other drugs too, but if their grades start sliding, if they start hanging around with a different crowd of kids, if you see them selling off some of their valuables because they need the money to buy the drugs, or if you see them coming home with some new electronics or some $400 headphones that you don't know where they got the money for, they may also be selling this stuff. So there's a lot of that. A part of the Drugs 101 program, and we also have our own called a mock teenager bedroom. So we set that up yesterday for a business group, and they came through, and people are shocked by the ways you can conceal substance use around your bedroom. So they get a chance to walk through this bedroom and try to identify things like there are water bottles that screw up. They look just like an Aquafina water bottle. It's got the proper label and everything. You can unscrew it, hide things in there. There's containers that look like sunscreen, and they're a flask. It's got all the warning labels and everything, just like you'd see at the pharmacy. So again, you need to go into your kids' rooms and see what's going on there. You need to have access to their mobile devices. I mean, they think you're spying on them, but really you're there to help them, right? And parents need to have that conversation from the moment that they turn one of those things over to their kids. That says, this is yours under these conditions. And that doesn't change. I'm not doing this to spy on you. I'm doing it to keep you safe because I care about you and I love you. And if you can do that from the very beginning, then your kids grow up with that understanding. That's the normal that they're used to. But so those things that I mentioned out of the ordinary things that you might see are some of the first things I would be concerned about. Yeah, and in particular, I should mention too, if they have recently had dental work done or a sports injury or something like that, make sure that you're monitoring the opioids that they're taking if they've been prescribed to take them.
Very good.
One of the things that kind of the discourse has been focused on is just utilization of medications that aren't necessarily prescribed to a person. So in the case of an adolescent, basically getting a hold of, their grandparents' medication or somebody, in their family. What I would also challenge kind of the audience to think about is, those medications that are actually being prescribed to people, and that also contributing to kind of the challenges that we face with the opiate epidemic. That there are a number of times that, basically, and not necessarily limited to our adolescent population, but our adult communities too, as I'm sure can be attested to, where somebody is taking these medications, then gets prescribed another medication, and the interaction between those two certainly puts somebody at risk and results in kind of depressed respiratory depression and results in an overdose, which is certainly something to consider. So if it is the case where an individual, the 2 points. One, if it's the case where you're actually being prescribed this medication, then I would ask that person just to say, talk with your doctor, see if there are any other alternatives that are out there that can certainly be helpful. Because one of the great things about where I work is that I have access to a lot of different resources if it's the person wanting to transition off these medications while still treating the original need for initially starting them. Specifically, if you're worried about low back pain, if you're worried about any musculoskeletal pain, transitioning them to a pain management clinic whose entire focus is to transition them to non-dependent interventions that are very effective and are going to, in the long run, be much more healthful for patient communities.
Well, Tom, you mentioned earlier that you've had some cases where they've been 2 or 3 times where you've had to go out.
Yes.
What are they doing if you pick a person up for the second time? Are they trying to get them to treatment centers, or what's going on there?
Well, yes, it could be that or all the above, but in a particular case, there's actually, I would say 3 times, a young lady addicted, brought her back with Narcan. Once she got out of hospital and was waiting for a placement into a treatment facility, she went in and overdosed again. And Milford Police brought her back, and she actually made the statement to her mother, who was very upset, crying, said, "Don't worry, Mom, Milford Police carries Narcan." And so after the second time, we actually, and she went to the hospital obviously, we actually charged her with a crime for the possession of heroin. And she went in for her pretrial, but unfortunately she had to be released because part of her sentence was to get to an inpatient facility. And it was going to be 48 or 72 hours before she could get into that facility. She overdosed again. And well, that's not necessarily the norm. Most people in law enforcement, you tell them that story, they're not surprised. It's, again, not surprised. In this particular case I'm talking about was heroin, but another time, a middle-aged woman, opioid addicted, prescription pills, and I thought, this was a few years ago, I thought that was really odd. It took me, off. But in Southeast Michigan, that's the prevalent profile of somebody that is addicted to the opioid prescription medications.
I see.
The middle-aged, I guess, I won't put a number on it because I don't want to get yelled at, but middle-aged female
Right.
in the suburban area is probably the most prevalent target for that abuse or abuses or that addiction.
Right.
And a lot of people don't know that, but it does stem from again, like we've talked about in Dr. Klausner, the appropriate use of the med, using it, and then either the highly addictive or just even pre-addictive stage is really, loving it and being able to go back and either convince a doctor or they know somebody else that had the same dental surgery or whatever surgery it is, and they get, their meds, and it becomes a perpetual problem in that. Which kind of brings me to a point I wanted to make, and Randy had mentioned about the letter he sent out to the realtors. There's always a way to get rid of those medications. In this day and age, you can walk into the Milford Police Department, your unused medication, you can go right in the mailbox, it's right in the lobby, and it's secured. There's no way of anybody getting in it, and it's being watched 24/7. And every single police department, including the Oakland County Sheriff's Department, has that same program, where the mailbox type device is in a lobby of the police department, and people can come put their unused medications in there. Because we really don't want them flushing them down the toilet or getting them into the garbage and getting into our environment.
Right.
And so that anybody who says, well, I didn't know what to do with it, these programs have been in place in Southeast Michigan for many years, and that's never going to be an acceptable excuse in my book.
Right.
I'd like to make a couple of comments about that because the Meyer store in White Lake, and I believe the one in Heartland now also has that, the prescription drug drop-off. That's really critical to get rid of that stuff, to get it out of the house when you no longer need it. But we also at the coalition carry a Deterra drug deactivation packet, they're called, and I'm happy to share those with anybody who hears this and would like to contact me by email or call my office. The ones we have, I think we mostly have the smaller packets, but you can throw about 15 pills or liquids in there. I think they'll even take care of the patch. Put a little warm water in there, you shake the packet up for about 30 seconds, and you can throw it away. Even the package is biodegradable. Oh. So they are not free to us, but I as the coalition director, buy several of those to give away when we're doing meetings with parents and other community members, because I like to make sure that at least they're aware that packet's available, because these drop-offs to the law enforcement are wonderful, but you got to remember that there are some people, that's a barrier for some people. Some people don't have transportation. Some people feel a little funny about taking their drugs there, like somebody's going to see what they're taking, although that doesn't really happen that way, if they think that, they're fearful of that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, we were talking about the repeat Narcan use.
Right.
Most law enforcement people I've talked to, and I think that includes Tom, while that doesn't make them happy, they know that the only way that person can be saved is by keeping them alive if you do not re-administer. And I hear a lot of community members come to me and say, well, that person, they just let them go. Third time, the loser, let them go. I don't feel that way. I think people who know anything about the seriousness of the disease of addiction understand that it sometimes takes many attempts before somebody can be on a successful road to recovery. That's why I love the prevention side of this, because, again, as I said earlier in the program, you don't have to recover from anything that you prevented. And so, but that's not always successful. But I think a little compassion and understanding and some knowledge about the nature of that disease of addiction, it would go a long ways to help people help others.
Well, let me ask all three of you a question. Is there anything that you see being done to help these people down the road? Or is it sort of a lost cause because you've got these cartels and
It's never a lost cause.
I know, I understand.
So yeah, absolutely. From a medical standpoint, there's quite a few things, and one of the things that we've referred to a lot is Narcan. And so, just for those audience members who are unfamiliar with this is a really important resource for those certain situations where somebody who has consumed any type of opiate is having altered mental status, is having difficulty breathing, to administer this medication. Basically, what it is that it's a competitive binder for the very receptors that the opioid has attached to. Basically, it has a higher affinity to those receptors, so it displaces those previous receptors, and it reverses the impact of that medication. And as all three of us can attest to, this is a life-saving measure, and it's certainly something that is very available. If it's something that a patient were ever to ask me to write a prescription for, it would be something that I'd be very elicit a conversation, but be very forthcoming with providing,
Right.
just because it's a very important resource for anybody struggling with opiate addiction. And to your second point, and I'll let these gentlemen also, because I think that's a very important question, is that what do we have available? That there are a lot of different ways to treat somebody who struggles with opiate addiction. As previously alluded to, addiction medicine is an entire specialty in medicine with individuals focused and focused only on helping people overcome their addiction. There are certain medications that certainly can be helpful in transitioning people off this class of medication. There's two more commonly ones. One traditionally is methadone, and that's more well known in the United States as a way to transition people off these medications. And the other one has been around for the last 15 to 20 years, probably even a little bit longer, but that is a little bit less well known, is Suboxone, and that has been very effective at transitioning people off. In addition, there are, when you talk about addiction treatment and addiction medicine, it's a team of highly trained professionals that includes your physician, includes a therapist, includes psychiatry,
Right.
to really provide a comprehensive treatment for these people. And it's such a complicated situation that it accounts for those people who want to quit, who have quit, but then who have relapsed. And so that model of recognizing that relapse is always a possibility is an important component to treating anybody who's struggling with that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, you had asked if it's just a lost cause, and of course, you wouldn't expect any one of the three of us up here to say
No.
that it is, and certainly
No.
is not. But each one of us has talked about different things, which is an important aspect of getting it taken care of, whether it's starting at home and having those conversations,
Right.
whether it's getting the right person, the right doctor treatment. Ask your doctor. Dr. Lawson said it several times. Ask your doctor.
Right.
But it's got to continue that way, and part of the things that can help is legislation. And what's happened is when the economy was bad in 2008, 2009, and legislators had to find money, where were some of the places that we cut money from? Community mental health.
Right.
Mental health, and this is certainly an arm of what mental health is to treat the addictions and whatnot. And I think there's like 1/3 less beds available for mental treatment today than there were in 2006, 2007. And so that arm of legislation, while I'm not big on taxing everybody, we need to find a way to keep community mental health
Right.
on stage for a lot of the patients that may come from dysfunctional families that can't afford to see a Dr. Larson or have the insurance to do it. And then if I have more of that tool available to law enforcement, we can use that instead of just incarcerating somebody that actually has an addiction
Right.
and thinking, okay, 30 days in the clink is going to do them well. They get out, they've gotten no treatment.
No.
Whereas if our judges have the ability and the resources to funnel more people into programs, if they're funded appropriately, which I
Right.
don't know what that magic number is,
Right.
but that can help dramatically as far as giving us alternatives to incarceration, along with everything else that Dr. Larson has said and Randy has said. But it's just got to be continual, because it's been a 4-decade pebble rolling down the mountain becoming a boulder.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And everybody's got to step in and understand it, and understand that, you know, somebody who's addicted. If we have somebody that's addicted to heroin in our community, and other people think, I could recognize, I know, I can tell, and it's not necessarily the case.
No.
But the guy walking down the street who's an alcoholic, or now will be smoking marijuana on a regular basis, I'll be able to tell. And we can't, as a society, be that judgmental within our community. We have to be open-minded and keep every aspect, every tool we have fighting this problem.
I think that's interesting too. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement people since I've had this job about this very thing, and the line I've had for every single one of them is that we're not arresting people just for the sake of arresting them. We're trying to get them to treatment. That we're hoping that's the result, not just incarcerating them. Because as Tom pointed out, no treatment is not going to help. Just locking them up won't work. And I did also want to mention that they're coming in June. I don't have the date quite set yet, but somewhere in the middle of June, we're going to do a Narcan training for community folks who can come in and learn how to administer Narcan appropriately. And I'm not sure how many seats will be available, but we usually have capacity. And then they'll actually get a Narcan kit to take home with them.
Right.
So that's sort of, I know that's sort of a bleak last resort kind of thing, and it's not technically prevention that I normally get involved in the sense that we try to stop young people from even getting started with drugs and alcohol. But as part of this comes through Oakland Community Health Network, down through them, and they help provide the training and the packets. So I think it's something that people these days really need to think about. And I think Tom pointed out too that these aren't like the old Skid Row guys you used to hear about. This is happening to very fine people and very fine families, and we need to help them no matter where they come from.
Well, it was interesting to hear you talk about mental health. I mean, you hear a lot about mental health nowadays, a lot of the problems that we have, but to tie it in with the drug program, I think that people have to understand and look at mental health as a major problem, and I'm sure the doctor can attest to that, because I'm sure that he sees people all the time.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the challenge in primary care, 30% of all clinic visits revolve around some form of mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety, that is the more common things, but drug dependence is certainly a diagnosis that is something that we treat. And what I would challenge the audience members to think about is just kind of, thinking about mental health as, we think about hypertension or type 2 diabetes, that this is something that a person is struggling with, this is a diagnosis, and that, that there's a specific, course of treatment options that are available to help with that, diagnosis, to help transition them from where they are now to a more healthful kind of outcome. And that I applaud Chief his assessment of just kind of the necessity for increasing resources for our mental health, just because of how challenging it is, how many people actually struggle with these issues, and how limited kind of the resources are currently. That it makes it a little bit more challenging environment to navigate. That being said, again, anybody who's struggling out there, there are always opportunities. There's always something that, it's just kind of finding that right person to confide in, and basically feeling that, and hearing kind of what resources are available.
Well, another thing that I've heard is in our young people, there's been a number of suicides. Now, does this drug program, being on drugs, does this contribute to the suicides? Do you know anything in that area, any one of you?
Well, again, humbly, I won't pretend to be an expert. We've seen some suicides since I've been the chief of police in Milford.
Right.
And it's not always directly related to an addiction.
Okay.
But generally, if you trace it back, and there has been opportunities or crossroads, opportunities for that individual to get some help, if it's not necessarily an addiction problem per se.
Right.
Oftentimes it is. Oftentimes somebody that has got to the point of taking their own life, there's multiple reasons for it happening. It's not just one of, whether it be alcohol or drug addiction or gambling. It's usually a multitude of things, but our society, we're very fortunate to have people like Randy and Dr. Larson, that there are resources out there, and you just need to ask, or it just needs to be identified, and we can stop some of those, hopefully prevent some of those suicides.
That's the interesting thing about that is that from our work, many of the same risk factors that bring kids to suicide, self-harm, drug use, that sort of thing, they're very similar things. So that, again, it makes it sort of complicated. Kids are dealing with the pressure I talked about earlier. Some kids may be dealing with sexual identity issues. Some kids are being bullied.
Yep.
All those kinds of things can lead to any of these kind of really harmful behaviors. So we are working. I can't say enough about how much Huron Valley Schools has supported what we do. They have started to consult more and more with us all the time to see what resources we have. They have a very keen eye for kids who they think are at risk, and they're trying to do what they can to address issues like bullying, all the way down into the elementary schools now. So a lot of this, the solution in the long run still comes down to all of us pulling together as a community. You have the law enforcement folks, you have the medical professionals, you have preventionists like myself, the school district, parents, even other youth. We bring them together. That's the whole concept of our 12-sector board that we've put together, that we not only can disseminate information out into those different sectors of the community, but we also can get the perspectives of a broad group of people and find out what's going on specifically in Huron Valley. Because this is a kind of a critical piece to be successful. I use this example from one of my classmates from one of the academies that I went to learn this work. Down in North Carolina, some friends of mine are in a coalition that deals with moonshine. And it's a serious problem. Around up north here, many of us laugh about it, think about hillbillies and all that kind of stuff, like it's a laughable thing. But it's a serious crime problem down there. Not only are people drinking, bad hooch and dying from that, but there's a lot of crime and cultural issues that are dealt with there. So they deal with that. That's not really appropriate for us to deal with. We have, for example, here identified underage drinking, which we're really concerned about at this time of the year, as kind of the most prevalent issue that we deal with in terms of teen misuse of drugs. So we're pulling together parents and talking to them about graduation celebrations and prom parties and that sort of thing, and how to maintain a safe environment for the kids there. We're talking to the kids themselves and providing opportunities for like the senior all-night party. So after graduation, they aren't just running loose looking for things to do that may or may not be good for them. So I think it's a matter of us all pulling together to address whether it's suicide, self-harm, drug addiction, that sort of thing, as a community. And I think that's the role of the coalition, is to facilitate that collaboration between everybody to help these young people primarily, so when they get a little farther down the road, where when opioid addiction is a more serious problem in that 25-year-old age, somewhere around there, that they've already got the tools they need to make better decisions.
Okay, now I just want everybody to understand out there in TV land that this is just not for the teens.
Right.
This program can go from the grandmas and the grandpas to the parents, all the way on down. Am I correct on that, Tom?
Yes, absolutely.
And Doctor, am I correct on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of talk a little bit more about, the reason why these medications, initially had started in our society was they have a predominant way to address pain, right?
Right.
And that, as we all know, at any one point of our, childhood, adult lives, that we've experienced pain in some capacity.
Right.
That, unfortunately, when they were originally very ubiquitous, and initially at the start of the epidemic, we weren't as aware of the profound public health implications and profound kind of complications that these medications have had, but that there is certainly a change in kind of the discussion, and it's certainly through panels like this where the awareness is a lot more heightened,
Right.
which is amazing, and I applaud that. What I think from a medical standpoint is really important is to consider, these medications have traditionally been prescribed, and I have so many patients who, have been on these medications for years and years. What's important to also consider in that context is that, one, there are a lot of amazing medical resources out there. There are a lot of different interventions that can, address your pain-related needs that do not have to deal with this class of medication.
Right.
And that, two, that your body, as you age, certainly changes physiologically, and that what you were once able to tolerate previously may not be the case, where it continues to be the case, and the impact that these medications may have on you, might be a little bit more profound.
Right.
And so, so it's certainly important.
Well, I think this shows how strongly your Huron Valley Chamber of Commerce and our school district feels about what's going on in the area. And I certainly appreciate every one of you coming here today and discussing all these problems. And if anybody needs to contact any one of the three of you, I'm sure that you're open. You can come into the police department and see Tom. He would be more than happy to help you out. Andrew, I'm sure, over at the medical center on Milford Road,
Right.
for Ford Hospital there, you would be more than happy to sit down with anybody. Randy, I know that you and your program would. So
Absolutely.
thank you so much. And we're so happy to have this whole program brought to you today. And let's say thank you to everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed your Huron Valley Chamber today. This is a production of HVS TV at Huron Valley Schools. This was made possible in partnership with the Huron Valley Chamber of Commerce and WOCA, the Western Oakland County Cable Communications Authority. Tune in for new episodes soon, and remember to support your local businesses.